Welcome back to the channel. Today I want to share a story with you that sounds like it came straight out of a movie, but it happened in a quiet, peaceful town in Appalachia. A man returns to inherit his family's old log cabin, and suddenly his life is pulled into a whirlwind of control, intimidation, and a mysterious fire that changed everything. What really happened? Who was behind it all? If you're curious, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video so you won't miss the twists and turns ahead. Now, let's begin this journey to uncover the truth. The Appalachian wind whispered through the old pine trees, carrying with it the scent of sap and the quiet murmur of a land that had seen generations come and go. In that stillness, an old pickup truck turned off the dusty red dirt road, making its way toward a forgotten patch of land, where a decaying log cabin stood alone in the tall grass, a silent witness to memories long buried. The man in the truck was Caleb Monroe, 36, a civil engineer from Charlotte. He had just received news that his great-uncle had passed away, leaving him this ancestral property, along with everything that remained of his childhood. Caleb had never imagined returning. He had once sworn he'd never set foot in the place where his youth was marked by adult arguments, bone-chilling winters, and sleepless nights listening to the wind howl through the cracks in the walls. But as he held the inheritance papers in his hands, reading the crooked handwriting of Uncle Ben, the quiet man who had always shielded him from his father's harsh words, Caleb realized this cabin wasn't just a crumbling old house. It was the last thread tying him to something pure, something more real than all the glass towers he had ever designed. As he stepped out of the truck, his boots sank into the soft earth, still damp from the night's rain. The grass reached his knees, the porch sagged, the roof was covered in moss. Everything seemed to be waiting, not for comfort or luxury, but for something to begin, something new, yet ancient. He stood still, eyes on the cabin, while his heart listened to something deeper, the call of his ancestors, of memory, and perhaps of destiny. Caleb made a quiet decision. He wouldn't sell the land. A neighbor had made an offer long ago. The money could have cleared his student loans, but some things couldn't be measured in dollars. He would restore the cabin, replant Uncle Ben's garden, and maybe, in the process, he'd rediscover a part of himself. But what Caleb didn't know was that this return wouldn't just be an emotional journey. It would be the start of a war. And from just beyond the ridge, unseen eyes were watching. Eyes belonging to an ambitious woman whose name would soon become his worst nightmare, Karen. Just 1 week after Caleb Monroe began clearing the land, he received the first letter. It was tucked neatly into a white envelope, placed right at his front door, the address handwritten with a careful, almost friendly touch. But the contents inside were anything but friendly. It was a formal notice from the Homeowners Association, HOA, written with a tone that was both polite and cautionary, stating that Caleb must comply with the current architectural regulations of the Sea Breeze Hollow community, where his log cabin stood near the northern boundary. Caleb frowned as he read it. In his memory, Uncle Ben's land had never been part of any HOA. It was an ancestral parcel, separated long before Sea Breeze Hollow was ever developed, and clearly outside the original zoning plans. Instead of arguing through letters, Caleb decided to call the name listed at the bottom of the page, a woman named Karen. The phone call was brief, cold, and condescending. Karen, the HOA president, refused to consider any explanation. She insisted that a newly approved zoning map now included his property, and therefore, Caleb was obligated to follow community standards if he wanted to continue living there. When he asked for a copy of the map, she scoffed, then hung up. In the days that followed, tensions escalated quickly. The second letter arrived, this time specifying that the current exterior paint color is not permitted in the community as it doesn't comply with the approved palette. Caleb hadn't even painted anything yet. He had just scraped off the old paint. Next came a demand to remove his mailbox, claiming its design did not match the HOA approved standard. Then another warning: the lawn must be trimmed weekly, with grass height not exceeding 4 inches. Ironically, before Caleb could even start mowing, Karen had already sent someone to take pictures and issued a violation notice. By this point, Caleb understood. This wasn't about rules. It was a covert power grab, and Karen was trying to extend her control into land the HOA had never legally managed, quietly expanding her influence across the northern edge of the community. Caleb also discovered that several nearby residents who had pushed back against the HOA had been threatened with legal action or socially isolated. Many eventually gave up or moved away. Determined to get clarity, Caleb went to the county zoning office. After hours of digging through public records, he confirmed that his land was not included in the HOA's original jurisdiction. However, a suspicious new amendment, recently submitted by Karen, was under review. If approved, it would legally bring Caleb's property under HOA authority. But instead of backing down, Caleb began documenting everything. Letters, phone calls, strange encounters. He installed cameras around his home. He knew that if he didn't fight back early, Karen wouldn't just strip him of his freedom. She would turn the entire area into a controlled compound where residents lived under constant surveillance disguised as community order. What Caleb didn't realize, however, was that this was only the beginning. Karen still had cards to play, and she wasn't used to being told no. By the second month of Caleb's return, the air around the log cabin no longer felt as fresh as it once had. Not because nature had changed, but because the feeling of being watched had slowly crept into his daily life. The security cameras Caleb had installed around the property began capturing strange footage. Unknown individuals walking past in the middle of the night, unfamiliar cars stopping briefly at the edge of the dirt path before quickly driving away. One morning, Caleb discovered the back gate wide open, a gate that couldn't possibly swing like that without someone intentionally tampering with the lock. Still, he remained composed. Every move the HOA made, especially Karen, was carefully documented by Caleb, as if he were building a case for a trial that had no date yet. But the more cautious he became, the more aggressive Karen grew. It started with the construction crew. Caleb had hired a team of local workers to reinforce the foundation and replace the rotting roof. Just 3 days into the job, a sharply dressed man appeared on site, introducing himself as a building inspector authorized by the HOA. He ordered the crew to stop work immediately, citing a lack of proper permits according to Seabreeze Hollow construction standards, and warned of heavy fines if they continued. Caleb pushed back, demanding credentials. The man refused to show any documents. When Caleb contacted the local authorities, they confirmed that no one had been authorized to inspect or interfere with work on his property. The so-called inspector was clearly someone Karen had sent to intimidate him. After that incident, rumors began to spread. Neighbors who had once greeted Caleb warmly now became distant. One elderly woman reluctantly confided that Karen had gone door to door, telling residents that Caleb was a troublemaker with a history of land disputes, even claiming he had been sued elsewhere. None of it was true, but the fabrications began to crack the fragile trust Caleb had been trying to build. Karen didn't stop there. The HOA filed a petition with the town council, requesting increased monitoring of unauthorized construction activity. They even approached the local sheriff, urging extra patrols in the area, not for safety, but as a psychological tactic. Though Caleb had broken no laws, he began to be treated like a problem, so he spoke up. Caleb posted his story on a local community forum, complete with photos, videos, and evidence showing how Karen had overstepped her authority. The post gained attention. Some residents chimed in with similar stories, showing their support. But within a day, the post disappeared. A forum moderator privately messaged him, "I was asked to remove the post due to its mention of a prominent community figure." Karen's reach had extended into the digital world. The isolation became undeniable. Caleb was now a lone man in a vast countryside, facing down an organization that wielded soft power like a weapon, driven by a woman who knew exactly how to bend rules to her will. But he didn't back down. With every threat, he documented more. He backed up every file, recorded every call. In silence, he built a thick case file, because Caleb knew that one day he'd have to bring the full truth to light. What he didn't expect was how far Karen was willing to go. And it would happen right there, on the very land he called home. On a Saturday morning in mid-August, golden sunlight spilled gently across the dew-covered grass. Caleb Monroe had just finished brewing his coffee and was preparing for another day of cleanup when he heard the sound of vehicles in the distance, unfamiliar and oddly loud for that time of day. First came the thuds of car doors closing, followed by a sudden flurry of noise, laughter, soft music drifting through the valley, and the metallic clatter of someone assembling a frame. Caleb stepped onto the porch and could hardly believe his eyes. On the flat patch of land to the west, where he had once planned to build a tool shed, stood a pristine white wedding arch. Rows of chairs had been neatly arranged. Women in silk dresses busily hung paper lanterns, while a small band was setting up audio equipment. No one had asked him. No one had even informed him. They were behaving as if they owned the property. Caleb hurried down the steps, weaving through the crowd of busy strangers until he found a man who looked like the event organizer. "Excuse me," Caleb said. "This is my land. What are you doing here?" The man blinked, confused. "This is the site we rented for today's wedding." Karen Witherspoon confirmed everything. "This is HOA property." Caleb's heart sank. Karen. Again. He immediately called the town sheriff, explained the situation in detail. 2 officers arrived, observed briefly, then turned to Caleb and said, "This is a property dispute, not yet settled in court. There's no sign of violence or criminal damage, so we can't intervene." Caleb showed them his deed. They acknowledged it, but did nothing. The wedding proceeded anyway, a blatant statement that Caleb's ownership meant nothing in the face of the HOA's shadow authority. More guests arrived by the minute, dressed in elegance, chatting cheerfully, walking freely across the land Caleb had worked months to restore. He stood alone, watching, angry, powerless. No one apologized. No one cared. Even the couple getting married never once looked at him, as if he were the intruder in their fairy tale. That evening, when the last guest had left, Caleb stayed behind and picked up the trash alone. Bottles, wrappers, wilted flowers, cake crumbs scattered in the grass. But the worst part wasn't the mess. It was the feeling that his land had been publicly taken from him, and no one said a word. From that moment on, Caleb knew this wasn't about property anymore. It was a battle for dignity. 3 weeks after the unauthorized wedding, Caleb's anger had not faded. He had filed a lawsuit against Karen and the HOA board in county court, including video evidence, witness statements, and a copy of his property deed. But in a place where personal connections often outweighed justice, the case was pushed to the bottom of the docket, pending review. Meanwhile, Caleb continued living on his own land like a stranger, isolated, watched, and always on edge. That night, a light rain fell. A strange kind of rain, thin but persistent. Not enough to cool the sticky September air, but just enough to make the night feel heavier. Caleb was sleeping when he was jolted awake by a soft cracking sound, like dry wood snapping. Then came the acrid smell. Then the flickering orange-red glow dancing across the wooden walls. He jumped out of bed. The house was on fire. The flames had started at the back of the kitchen, where no electrical appliances had been running. The fire spread fast, as if someone had used an accelerant. In less than 10 minutes, the roof began to cave in. Caleb ran outside, phone burning hot in his hand, and dialed 911. He shouted into the receiver, "This is 316 Hollow Creek Road. Log cabin fire. We need the fire department immediately." But the fire truck arrived over 20 minutes late. When they finally reached the property, the main entrance was blocked by a newly installed metal gate with a combination lock. Firefighters had to break through it to get in. In those precious minutes, the house had been completely consumed. Caleb stood frozen, barefoot in the mud, the glow of the fire casting shadows across his stunned face. He didn't cry. What he felt wasn't grief. It was emptiness, as if something vital had been ripped out of him and could never be replaced. The next morning, fire investigators came, but they found no conclusive signs of arson. Caleb showed them the newly installed gate. HOA representatives claimed it was part of a neighborhood safety initiative and insisted they knew nothing about the fire until they heard the sirens. No one took responsibility. No one apologized. No one even asked if Caleb needed help. But he knew the truth. This was no accident. This was a warning, a final threat. If he refused to bow to their control, they would take everything. What Karen didn't realize, however, was that she had made a critical mistake. Caleb had nothing left to lose. And when a man has nothing left, all he has is the truth and the will to expose it. The fire had left behind a gaping black scar in the Appalachian Valley. not just on the ground where the family's log cabin once stood, but in Caleb Monroe's heart and mind. In the days following the blaze, he lived in a small tent, pitched near the forest's edge, close to the charred beams and shattered brick foundation that remained. People passed by, but few stopped. Some cast sympathetic glances, but most looked away. In Seabreeze Hollow, people had learned to avoid trouble, not challenge power. But Caleb wasn't born to bow his head. From the ashes, he began piecing together the truth. He reprinted his property deed, backed up all footage from his security cameras, compiled every HOA notice, every ridiculous citation, and most importantly, photos of the newly installed gate that had blocked emergency access on the night of the fire. He no longer believed the local authorities would protect him, so he turned outward to the media. Caleb reached out to an independent news outlet in Virginia. He sent them everything, his evidence, his story. 3 days later, a skeptical film crew arrived, cameras in hand. They interviewed him right there on the blackened ground, while ash still blew softly through the valley air. At first, only a few thousand people watched. But then the story exploded, because this wasn't just a property dispute. It was a symbol of something happening across America, the unchecked power of overreaching HOAs, and the quiet erosion of personal freedom. A lawyer named Rebecca Flynn, who specialized in abusive HOA cases, contacted Caleb. She had faced off against stronger HOA boards than Seabreeze Hollow, and she understood Karen's type all too well. "They always think they're above the law," she told Caleb, "until the law shows up at their door." Rebecca agreed to represent him, free of charge. Her arrival changed everything. Caleb filed a formal lawsuit in federal court, accusing the HOA of violating property rights, trespassing, intimidation, and willful destruction. The media followed every step, and one by one, formerly silent residents began to speak out. Stories of being bullied for planting the wrong flowers, or forced to tear down porch additions despite having legal permits. Karen could no longer hide behind procedure or power. At a public town meeting, once Karen's personal stage where she carried herself like a de facto mayor, Caleb appeared with his lawyer and a small army of reporters. As he laid out a thick binder of evidence before the town council, some in the crowd wept, others nodded solemnly. Karen sat expressionless, but her hands visibly trembled. At that same meeting, Rebecca revealed the final blow. Karen had personally signed a rental contract for the unregulated parcel of land used for the unauthorized wedding. The documents showed her signature, the date, and the payment, wired directly to her personal account. The room fell silent. It was irrefutable. Karen had abused her power for personal gain. From the ashes, Caleb had turned the tide. He didn't just reclaim his voice. He opened the floodgates for others to speak up. He was no longer a victim. He had become a symbol of resistance against unjust control. 7 months after the fire, Caleb Monroe's land was no longer a forgotten place. On the scorched ground, a new structure was rising, not of rotting wood and memories, but of concrete, steel, and determination. People who once kept their distance now came to help. Some brought supplies, others brought food. Local carpenters volunteered their time for weeks. Seabreeze Hollow, once ruled by fear, was slowly being reborn, all from the solitary stand of one man who refused to stay silent. Karen was forced to resign. Following the explosive public meeting, the town council launched an internal investigation. Shady dealings, vague decision-making, and unauthorized actions were exposed. No one came to her defense. Even her closest allies fell silent, distancing themselves to avoid legal fallout. Karen vanished from the community as if she'd never existed, leaving behind a locked office, disorganized files, and a reputation beyond repair. Caleb didn't celebrate. He knew the cost of every court appearance, every media interview, every file submitted was pain. But through that journey, he reclaimed the most precious things Karen tried to steal, his right to own his land and his right to be heard. After winning the lawsuit, Caleb founded a small nonprofit called Ashes to Action. It provided legal guidance and support to residents across the country who were facing HOA abuse. He appeared on a few news programs, not as a hero, but as a cautionary tale. He often ended interviews with a quiet reminder, "You are not alone. They're only powerful when you stay silent." And the new house, built not as a replica of the past, but as a symbol of a different future, was designed with an open living room, large windows facing the pine forest, and on the wall near the fireplace, a single framed photo. Uncle Ben, sitting on the old front porch, a coffee cup in hand, eyes gazing into the distance. That's where it all began, and where Caleb found himself again. From the ashes, he didn't just rebuild a house. He rebuilt faith in justice, in resilience, and in the simple truth that everyone deserves, to live free on land that is truly theirs. Life sometimes puts us in unfair situations, where logic isn't enough and truth is twisted by power. The story of Caleb Monroe is more than just a land dispute. It's a symbol of what many of us might face, when all you want is to live peacefully on your own property, but instead, you're met with threats, isolation, and oppression by those who exploit rules to gain control. The biggest message here is this: don't stay silent when your rights are being violated. Silence might feel like the safest option in the short term, but in the long run, it allows injustice to grow. Caleb wasn't someone who sought conflict, but he understood that if he didn't speak up, more people would become victims, and no one would be there to protect them. From the moment he decided to fight back, even as just one man, the entire community began to wake up. The second lesson is that truth must be defended through action. Caleb didn't just sit quietly in anger. He documented everything, gathered evidence, found a lawyer, and went to the media. It's a reminder that in today's world, we have many tools to protect ourselves, if we choose to use them wisely. And finally, this story teaches us about resilience. A house may burn down, but if you hold on to your faith, your spirit, and your dignity, you can rebuild from the ashes. When you rise up, you don't just defend your own rights, you inspire others to stand for what's right too. Remember this: justice doesn't come on its own. It comes when someone dares to demand it. And sometimes all it takes is one person saying enough to change an entire community. Caleb's story might be an exception, but it could also be happening to someone just down the street from you. Have you ever had a frustrating experience with a neighbor like this? Share your story in the comments. I'd really love to hear from you. And if you found this video meaningful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to spread more real emotional stories like this one. See you in the next episode.